Well, then, I'd like to welcome everybody to this excellent episode of, although we're not all together yet, Retro
One
X,
day.
and we are the X Dudes. I guess that's what we'll call ourselves, the X Dudes. And from east to
Better
west,
than X-Men.
well, we don't want to get sued or anything, but
Exactly.
from east to west, let's see if I can do this properly. We are Pao from the Philippines. Say hello.
Hello, I'm from the far east.
We have Jacob from Canada. Say hello.
Ape.
And we have Jason from California, right?
Yes, California.
All right, and I am Ryan. I'm out here in stormy Maryland right now because I'm brave enough to come out during Hurricane Sandy. And together we are the X Dudes. And the game that we had to review is a lovely Genesis game known as Castlevania Bloodlines. It was known as the New Generation in Europe. And it was one of the first games on the Genesis, at
What?
least the Castlevania games, to feature blood in a North American game, and a lot of it. We're going to review pretty much everything down from the graphics and the gameplay to the story. So I guess right now, what do you guys want to focus on in terms of reviewing? What do you think would be the most important thing to tackle first?
Hold on. Are we gonna do this as if we are comparing it from the other Castlevania titles,
Not
or
really.
are we reviewing it? Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, that maybe we could start with.
Oh, you know
The
what? I
graphics?
actually have a question to ask you guys. And because this is Halloween and everybody gets into the Halloween spirit with zombies and every other trite cliche there is. Ooh, it's starting to rain. That's nice. The question I have for you guys is something that I used to, ask around when I used to work in retail. And we'd sit around, we were bored, and we'd say, okay, let's assume that one day the zombies broke out everywhere in the streets, the malls, everywhere. And the only way you could go is Walmart for protection. But let's assume that we all run into each other at Walmart and we say, well, we've got our rations, we've got everything. Let's find some weapons. So my question is, what item would you pull off the shelf, or combination of items would you pull off the shelf at Walmart? No guns allowed, to protect yourself from the zombies. I'll ask the question a little later today, just after we're wrapping up, because I want you guys to think about it and put some thought into it, because it's actually, you could get some pretty amusing responses. But anyway, let's get back to Castlevania. We have a lot of things that we need to discuss about the game because it's actually pretty in-depth, or it's a pretty deep game. What do you guys think we should tackle first?
We could start with minus all the gameplay. We could start with the graphics first because, as far as I know, Bloodlines has amazing graphics. I mean, when I started reading reviews about it,
Right.
they started talking about like how good it looked in comparison to the other games. So we could start about that.
All right. Well, you know what? The graphics in Bloodlines, I believe they're one of the best presentations on the Genesis. And if you start with Bloodlines and work your way up to any other Genesis game, you might even find that Bloodlines has the best, is like the standard for Genesis games. And it's very appropriately entitled Bloodlines because there is a ton of blood and gore in the game. Not really something American gamers and North American gamers were used to seeing it, for Castlevania at least. I mean, we had plenty of other bloody games, but Castlevania, for all those horror themes and all those cliches, you didn't get a lot of blood or gore in them. But here we are with enemies being dismembered and decapitated and disemboweled, and any number of things that are happening in this game. And obviously, if this is the first time you're seeing it on a Castlevania game, your mind is blown. It's like the Mortal Kombat experience. It has vibrant 16-bit graphics, and one thing I do want to say about it is that it really excels at parallax scrolling, which is when you see a background moving in a different speed, at a different rate from the foreground, to give the illusion of like 3D. And the Genesis really excelled at parallax scrolling, maybe even more so than the Super Nintendo. I don't really want to open that can of worms, but this game nonetheless really did use great parallax scrolling. What do you think, Pal? This is one of your first Genesis games, so I want to hear your impression on the graphics.
Yeah, it is. Well, as far as the how the game looks, I've been a Super Nintendo guy. I mean, I've been a Nintendo guy for the longest time. So, I can't really judge the Genesis based on how I would look at it as if I was a kid. Like, oh, the graphics are great because in Super Nintendo I was amazed by it. But just looking at the game right now, I mean, I was surprised because I thought like, oh, this is the Genesis. This is supposed to be like in the level of the Super Nintendo, right? And I was just surprised like how what they could do, especially with the tower, the leaning tower of pizza
Yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Yeah, that was really amazing. I mean, I was surprised because I was like, well, dude, this is the Genesis. This is supposed to be like in the level of Super Nintendo, and I don't know. I was just really amazed by it. I mean, even if we're gonna talk about the gameplay later and the controls because I wasn't really a big fan of the
right.
original Castlevania,
Okay.
but in terms of visuals and everything else, I was just blown by it. Especially that second stage where you have like there's a reflection of the water going up and down while
Mm-hmm.
you're
Oh yeah,
walking through the ruins. Yeah, that was really good, man.
it
It
was.
was.
I agree with you. And even the pause, the little logo that pops up when you pause the game, shows up in the bottom where the water is. Now, you said, Jason, that you had a Genesis and you played one. So I'm imagining that these graphics on that you're seeing are nothing really new to you. But what do you think in terms of measuring this game against the other Genesis games? How do you think this one fares?
Overall, I thought the graphics were pretty good. And some of the levels, there was a whole lot going on, like all the spinning gears in the background
Yeah.
and all these enemies moving around behind that you can't touch, but they're there throwing stuff at you. Some were very. The graphics in general were pretty good, especially for a Genesis game.
Absolutely. And Jacob, you are you more or less cut your teeth on the N64, is that right?
More or less. I don't know.
So,
Through my youth, I occasionally played like a Genesis or.
oh, okay. So you do have experience with the Genesis. What do you think about the graphics and the presentation of the game, as you measure it against your experiences with other 16-bit games?
I don't know. Just definitely a cut above from what I've seen in the past. Like it's. I don't know. The art styles just feels heavily like Castlevania, but at the same time, it's the actual graphical capabilities of it are beyond expectation.
Did you know?
Like it
Go on,
hmm?
go on.
Like it didn't even slow at any points. It
Oh,
kind of just ran smoothly.
well, that's the blast processing, supposedly at least. But yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot of background things going on that you notice when you're walking through the level, and a lot of the times they actually don't do anything for the game or the gameplay, but you know it's there. And when you're walking by, you like just see random a corpse hanging from the ceiling, like in Doom, or blood just falling down from the ceiling. Actually, that's one thing that I didn't really have explained to me was why does blood drip down off of the ceiling? I didn't really get that, but it's Bloodlines. Then I realized, oh, it's Bloodlines. It's kind of in the title of the game that has got to have things like that going on. But it's a very nice presentation. If I, of all the games I've ever played on the Genesis with nice graphics like Gunstar Heroes and even like Sonic 2 and 3, which had, cartoonish graphics, but still really nice graphics. This one, I think, I don't want to say it's the best because obviously it would be up for debate, but I do want to say, as far as the games of I've ever played, this is probably top five. I would have to at least say that. And we have, I mean, obviously graphics are a very important thing for a game. It's not the only thing, however, that makes a great game. It has to be a component to the overall the game itself. So, I mean, gameplay wise, what do you guys think? Pal, you mentioned that you're really not a fan of Castlevania games in general, right? But what do you think of the actual gameplay in this one as far as getting through the levels and how easy it is to pick up and play?
um Well, I know, I'm a big fan of sequelitis, so there are things that Egoraptor has, you know, shared with the world that stuck with me consistently.
Right.
So one thing that he said about the Castlevania games is that the only reason you have items is because it's really hard to use your whip. And well, actually used Eric with the one with the staff, right?
Yep.
His name is Eric. Yeah. And it's just a little bit convenient to just use your staff and or what is it, trident, instead of just using your items. Like there's the potion thing that you can throw, so that it's consistently on the ground and it damages people in an area of effect kind of thing. But it's not it's something you won't really use if you can just use your staff. That it you have a really long range, and I mean, even if you have the axis that you can throw upwards, you could just jump and then use your axe and your trident anyway. So even if I consistently try to think that, oh, maybe I should use the boomerang here, or maybe I should use the axe here or something. It wasn't really something that I thought that I needed to do. So I was confused with the item part of the game. As far as how difficult the game is or how easy it is to control, it was I I guess it was pretty slow, but it's a Castlevania thing. You're not really supposed to be running, right? It's supposed to be you're just walking and then trying to get through all the enemies. One thing I hated about it is how when you're walking through the stairs, that's been a problem with Castlevania for me for the longest time. It's like you're trying to get through a couple of enemies, and the level design is designed to mess you up because when you're going up the stairs, you have so many enemies but around there. I don't know if you guys get what I'm trying to say,
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, I like it though. I think it's part of the game, but it's just one of those level designs that I really hate. I don't know if you guys get what I'm trying to say.
I get it,
I'd
and
rather,
that's kind of classic Castlevania, the complaint that you have there.
God
yeah.
forbid if you don't hold up.
You
No,
fall.
I like. I think that it's really a Castlevania thing. The having stairs like closer to you and then you just walk up and whatever. But it was one of those game designs that I really didn't like. I mean, in comparison to like some games that just require you to jump over bottomless pits. But I mean that gets really boring. So I mean for me, I mean I wasn't really a big fan of Castlevania. So when I started playing this game, it was a little bit fresh for me.
Yeah,
So
right. Well, that's actually one thing is a lot of people do mention that Castlevania games are a little on the relentlessly hard side. And if you had played the first three, actually the NES games, Castlevania 1, 2, and 3, Simon's Quest was the second one, and the Angry Video Game Nerd absolutely dug that one, a new one. But the other ones, I mean, by the time the Super Nintendo came out, Castlevania was actually one of the early games to come out on the Super Nintendo. And I don't really want to talk about it too much because we're focusing on the Genesis game, but the Super Nintendo game made use of eight directional attacks, kind of like when you're playing Mega Man, you just walk around with your P Buster or whatever, and you're shooting straight forward, and then for the first time you get Metal Man's broken weapon, and you just shoot that shit everywhere. Similar like Super Nintendo's Castlevania, because you could just whip in all directions, and you could even flail your whip around, in absolutely any direction. So this game, it doesn't have that kind of um, control. It doesn't have that good control. It reminds me really of classic Castlevania, more like Castlevania 1, for example, because Eric can whip when he's standing, on the ground. He can only whip forward. If he jumps, he can whip up and diagonally, but if he's just standing, he only whips forward. Eric, on the other hand, can uh, stab in the direction of, up, down, or I mean, diagonally up or forward, but he can't do that when he's jumping. So they have differences, like variations in the characters. But as far as the game controlling like classic Castlevania, that's actually a good thing and a bad thing. The good news is that the game has a familiar interface with very few changes, and the people who really like the old Castlevania games, they're going to get what they want. And the changes actually do improve upon the formula. Like there's an addition called the item crashes. I don't know if you guys got into that, but it wasn't seen in North America prior to Bloodlines. It's when you like use a really powerful version of the weapon that you're holding, like the axe has its item crash and whatnot. But the bad news is that it's classic Castlevania. It feels kind of stiff sometimes. The jumping actually, the jumping is fairly rigid in comparison to Super Nintendo version. You can't really control it. Once you jump, you're either going to go forward all the way, or you might miss the platform. You might get hit, and then you'll fly backwards off of a cliff, which will always mean instant death. It's never fair. This game is not fair. Um, the rigid jump mechanics, that's actually a kind of a curious choice because Super Castlevania on the Super Nintendo came out a couple of years prior to Bloodlines, and it actually had more manageable jump mechanics. Um, there are difficult moments too for players who brave the story mode because you got to keep count of your lives. The game only offers limited continues. If you die, I think it's was it two or three times you got to continue, and I think you have two continues and then it's over. You got to start over from the beginning. Luckily, you do have a password system, And this system allows you to keep track not only of what stage you're on, but how many lives you had left and what character was used. It's actually a pretty unique system because it really keeps track of all the different variables that could come into play. But
Yeah, it wasn't like all the other passwords that you just save whatever stage you are and then you lose all your weapons. At
right,
least for this one, you use the password. You still have your items or whatever.
right, absolutely. It really did do a good job of saving that. And one problem I have with passwords is that they tend to be a little convoluted in terms of the length. But this one was manageable. I mean, when I played through, I took basically like a screenshot of or like a picture of the password, just like to save it for reference if I ever wanted to pick up in the future. Um, but yeah, I mean the gameplay, it's classic Castlevania. It's what you expect if you're a fan of the series. What do you think, Jason? I know that you've played a lot of great Genesis games, I'm sure, and you're probably used to how other games control. I think I remember you mentioning that you're not too up on the Castlevania series.
The enemies for the most part were pretty easy. It's pretty straightforward to get through them. But the combination of the level and the enemies, like if you're on the stairs, they'll come up above you on the stairs. But I played as Eric, so I had to try to, and I couldn't strike diagonally to hit them. So you kind of have to time your jumps and all this other stuff. Plan out how to hit them and not have them hit you, and then you recoil into a bottomless pit or something.
Right.
And then the jumping, yeah, I did notice it was like a all or nothing proposition. Doesn't matter if you tap the button or if you hold the button, you're going fixed distance up or sideways, unless you use your super jump,
Right.
which you can only go straight up, which is kind of annoying because it's to do like a long leap at an angle or something, but it wouldn't allow me to.
Right. Right. And you're talking about Eric's super jump, right?
Yeah.
All right. That's actually one thing I didn't mention is that Eric, what is his name? Eric Licard. We're going to get into the characters, but Eric does have something that
I think
John can't
it's
use.
Eric Ricardo.
Oh, well, that's actually what it's supposed to be. But you know how sometimes the Japanese to English translation doesn't always come out correctly. So I think in my version it just says Licard, which doesn't really make
Yeah,
too much sense. But we'll get
No,
into
I think
that.
it's Ricardo.
what it said on my end too.
Right, right. But anyway, I mean, actually, that's a good way to segue into the characters because I mean, the unique thing about this game is that they give you two characters that you could use to play through, and they have different mechanics, and there are times when they can take different paths. And there's Eric Licard. We'll just call him Eric Licard or Ricardo, whatever you want to say. It's the same guy. And John Morris, who is the Bram Stoker Dracula tie-in. What'd you guys think about the characters in the game? What'd you think about the variety of those two that you can pick? I'll start with Jacob. Actually, you know what, Jacob? We didn't get your opinion on the gameplay, did we?
I don't know. A lot had been summed up. Like again, there was a really weird, rigid, and a lot of the time I don't know if it was just me doing something funny or the game itself or whatever wrong. But I found myself just bouncing up and down and spot like an idiot sometimes, just trying to get onto a
Right.
onto a platform.
Holy.
But no, it's I jumped off John Morris pretty much right away because he just did not do it for me. He moved. He felt like he moved a little bit more slowly at least. And I mean, the whip was again. They returned to Castlevania 1, which was like, oh yeah, I noticed that right away. First thing I noticed when I started playing is like, oh, this is very much Castlevania 1, which irked me a little bit because it's again things like the stairs and weird enemy placements. Like enemies hit you, you get knocked back, they receive no penalty, and oh what? You just happen to get hit above some stairs, you fall to your death.
Yep.
Or you got an enemy with range that runs faster than you do. Thanks guys.
Yeah, that was annoying as hell.
So you mentioned that you played through as John, right? You're kind of you just gravitated towards him in the beginning because he had the whip.
I started with him, and then I got a bit into the game, and then just ran out of continues. I'm like, all right, yeah, time to change. And the moment I got on Mr. Licard, it just ran a little bit better because like I was like, all right, yeah, new Castlevania number 4. Of course I'll be able to whip upwards.
Mm-hmm.
Nope. And suddenly I can stab things in the air. This is wonderful.
Yeah, it does. You do have more control on the ground as Eric, and you can do that super jump, which is great because you can just basically do shortcuts from that point on.
There was this thing that Eric did that I had to Google actually because I played through it until around level 4 or something, but they said that they have this special turning kind of move thing that you're twirling your staff.
Oh, yeah, yeah, that.
Right.
I didn't figure it out on my own. I mean, usually when I play video games, especially at video games in the Super NES era, you usually just play through the game and then you discover things as you play. It's not something that you have to read the manual for, right? So I when I saw this part of the game, I was a little disappointed because it was some. I don't think it was something that I could discover. You know, it's
I
you really have to read about it.
I kind of just accidentally stumbled upon it. Just accidentally did the right combination of commands. I'm like, oh,
Right.
let's see if I can recreate that.
It's kind of cool
Maybe
when you come across something like that. You know, you don't really know whether or not it's in the game, but all of a sudden there it is happening, and you're like, "Ooh, how am I doing that?"
Yeah, there are a lot of moves like that in Double Dragon, which is why immediately remember that game when we were playing it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. And we will get to that next time, won't we? Because I mean,
Yeah, well,
we kind of have to commit to
that's
doing this. We have to. I mean,
no, yeah, I know. I just mentioned it because I know that there are like things that we do because sometimes you have a combination of moves that could lead on towards that action. Like for example, in I'm just gonna use Double Dragon as an example. Okay, like when you jump, the minute you drop down and kneel.
yeah.
If you press a punch button or a jump button as soon as you stand up, you're gonna do something. So maybe it's a little bit easier to discover the moves that way because I mean, no matter what you do, you're gonna be bashing the punch button when you're jumping, right?
Yeah.
But as for Castlevania, the way to do that spinning thing move is for you to make a slash, hold the attack button, and then move the other direction. And I didn't think that it was a really common thing for gamers to do. I mean, usually the thing you do is you bash the attack button and then you hold the jump button. So it was. I mean, I discovered the super jump thing. I mean, I didn't really know what it did, but it was something I discovered because when you crouch, you're immediately charging your jump. But as for the staff spinning thing, when I read about it and I tried playing it in the game itself, I didn't even think that it had an application because the range for spinning your staff is really close to you, so you're not really damaging anything. It's more like a defensive kind of move. So yeah, I just thought that maybe if they, I just thought that maybe there are other moves that could appear that could be easily be more um discovered.
Right.
it just wasn't very intuitive, and I found that again with the whip. If you is swing, like I accidentally did that as well, and I'm just like, there was nothing that indicated I could do this. I just accidentally did it. There'd probably be a point where I would need it that it would become more apparent, but just at the time it was just didn't automatically make sense.
No.
It
And
was fancy.
yeah,
It looked good.
it looks cool. And well, I mean, if you had played Castlevania 4 before it, you know that there are certain points where you can swing. I don't think you could swing on every single ceiling, but John really gets fancy with, and he can swing on any ceiling. Actually, sometimes that was a hindrance because I tried to whip an enemy. You'll see it in the clip. Actually, I tried to whip an enemy, and I actually wind up attaching to the ceiling and launching myself towards the enemy, which wasn't too good. But now that we're talking about the characters like John and Eric and whatnot, I think it would at least be pertinent to talk a little bit about them because there is kind of a backstory between them. It's not really explained throughout the entire course of the game, but John Morris, I'll just go ahead and call him the main character of the game because he's got the vampire killer whip, and usually when you play a Castlevania game,
It's
the
all about
guy,
the whip.
yeah, the guy who
Yeah.
wields the whip is the main character, whether it's Simon Belmont or Richter
And it
Belmont or
has
whatever.
so many innuendos in it.
Oh yeah, true. But Konami basically tried to tie in the Castlevania novel, or sorry, the Dracula novel to Castlevania, and John is the result of that. He is a descendant apparently of Quincy Morris, who is from the book. And if I remember correctly, he is one of the people who either slays Dracula or he confronts him. I'm not exactly sure because I haven't read the book, but he is actually a distant relative in this game. He is a distant relative to the Belmont clan, to the Belmont family, which has produced Simon Belmont, the guy of Castlevania 1 and 2. So the secondary character that you could pick is Eric Lacard, who has a personal vendetta against the game's primary villain. Now he wields a spear that's called ooh, I can't remember the name of it. It's like the Alucard spear or something like that. It's
Yeah,
tie-in.
Alucard here.
Right. It's actually a tie-in to Alucard, the character from very famous character from Castlevania. He appeared in Castlevania 3, I think, and as Dracula's son, and later came into play in Symphony of the Night. Um, Now, as we already mentioned, there are some differences in the mechanics of the characters. John can whip diagonally. Eric can attack diagonally while he's on the ground. John can swing from ceilings. Eric can high jump. There is some variation between them. And it sounds like most of us say, well, we might start with John because he looks like the main character, but Eric seems to control a little better. Would you guys agree with that, or would
Yeah,
you?
Yeah,
no,
I
I would.
definitely agree with that.
Now, if you were playing through, I'll ask Jason this one. If you were playing through the game and you had a chance to go through like level 1 and 2 as John and Eric, do you think you'd rather finish it as Eric just to, because it's easier to, or do you think you'd want to stick with John because you might get a better story out of it?
Um, I'm not sure. I never really played as Eric, or as John. Actually, I played as Eric the whole time. Um, I'd probably just go with what makes it easiest for me, and sounds like Eric had some advantages.
Yeah, that was kind of a silly question I asked because most people are going to pick Eric anyway, and I'm just trying to give John some kind of credit here. One thing
No, I don't think so.
you
I
know,
mean, well, the only reason I picked Eric was because I wanted to try someone new. I never even tried John.
oh,
I always thought that they had the same controls. It was just a different reach and a different, special move. But I never really thought that, Eric had an easier jump arc or an easier movement than John.
right, it's not so
Was
much
it
the
really
jump arcs, it's just it seems like you have more control when you're swinging the staff around rather than whipping.
Oh, okay. Was it faster? Did it connect faster or?
It felt more reliable, and I don't know if there was literally more range, but at least gave the appearance of it, which was good enough for myself.
Yeah, I actually have a tale to tell you guys about using the spear. Everyone knows when you're attacking, you're expecting the attack to go forward and hit the enemy that's in front of you. One time I was really in trouble here. I was playing on the Leaning Tower Pisa stage, and I was ascending the tower. Those platforms, the disconnected platforms that you have to jump up.
That was amazing.
And one of those flying demons came up behind me, ready to rape me up the butt. And as Eric, I swung the staff forward, and actually the guy behind me was like obliterated into a million pieces. I'm like, wait a minute, what just happened? Was that like an act of God or something? Because I know I aimed forward and I killed the guy in front of me, but evidently Eric pulls his spear back just before he launches it forward and
Yeah,
eliminated the guy behind me while I killed the guy in front of me.
it seemed to do a double attack too. How he stabs it forward and kind of pulls it
Oh
back to
yeah.
himself. It hit twice, and like I
Yeah,
get to hit
that confused me
twice
a
per
bit
attack.
because that confused me a bit because I didn't know how to do it. Was I bashing it twice? Because it hit once in some enemies, the ones that block. But the ones that don't block, they get hit twice. And I've been trying to recreate it by, reloading the stages over and over. But I could never get what exactly he was doing. Was it because the end of the spear was expanding or something? I don't know.
He was pulling it back, so basically the forward thrust was one attack, and then as he pulls it back, it's counted as the second. I think that's what happened, but it seems to me, I don't know if this is true, but it seems to me like John's attacks may have done more damage as in terms of the one hit potential. I don't know if that's true. It just seems to me that I was able to down certain enemies a little quicker as John rather than as Eric.
Hmm. Okay.
Anyway, that's kind of a minor. That's actually kind of a minor thing to talk about in terms of the characters of the.
You know what? Just a side thing. I'm looking at the cover art.
Yep.
And Eric looks like a girl.
He does, and there's a reason behind his basically transformation uh, from what he was as you're looking at him there and what he appeared to be in the game. Apparently, the North American distributor or the gamers felt that Eric looked a little too effeminate or feminine, and they wanted a little bit more of a manly character. So they did alter his appearance from the way he looks there to the way he looks. But that's actually a good catch, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because that is something that that is talked about even to this day about the changes that were in this game.
But I don't think. I think they really because if you check the translation of the name, it's Erica, Ricardo.
Right.
I think if you know how Japanese work, it's Eric. Eric could be like the coup, right? But it could be Erica also or Ricardo.
That's
I mean, I don't get it.
well,
It's just kind of if you look at the character design, it's really meant to be a girl. I mean, if you look at the eyes and the hair, the yellow hair, and the body. I mean, in comparison to John, oh yeah, John Morris,
right.
who has like a big buff body and with the whip and everything, and you look at Eric, quote unquote Erica, who has a feminine-ish body.
Well,
That's kind of
I do notice that too, and I wonder if that is a commentary on on Spain or Spanish characters in general, because if you recall, well, I mean, number one, John is a really buff dude. You know, he's the American Texan. You know, they got to make a manly man for that Texas guy, but Eric is from Spain, and if you remember in Street Fighter 2, they had a Claude character from Spain. We know him as Vega.
Vega.
Yeah, Vega, but he's known as Balrog in Japan because of the naming issue in the North America. And yeah, actually, he does act rather effeminate, doesn't he? He's got his mask. He doesn't want anyone to hit his pretty face. He always, he bounces around kind of like a ballerina. He's. I wonder if the Japanese were using that as to kind of make a statement on Spanish culture or something. Maybe they were saying that the men were kind of effeminate. I don't know. I really don't know, but that's actually a good observation. Now, I don't think he was intended to be a female because um, I don't want to make a political statement here, but he's the reason he has a vendetta in the game is he wants to either I think he's rescuing his fiance or he's attacking the person who
oh, it's about a girl. What is
captured.
this?
Yeah,
It's like a typical story of most games back then, right? It was always a guy thing. Like you're a kid who wants to be the superhero guy, and you're about to save the girl.
yeah.
It's like a common. I mean, it's obviously common in the whole world, but back then it was always almost always the same story.
Sorry, Mario. The princess is in another castle.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what? The those two characters in the game are not the only characters that we have to talk about. We actually want to talk a little bit about the enemies too, because there's a very large assortment of them in this game. And it seems like as the further you progress into the game, it introduces new enemies, keeping the experience fresh. And now these enemies range anything from the obligatory zombies to skeletons and mummies and disembodied Medusa heads and other horror movie staples. You know, they get recycled a lot, but here they are in Castlevania. They've assembled en masse, and they're in this one game. And it's not just one thing to have a lot of different characters or enemies, rather, or at least a variation in how they look. It's also another thing that they keep the experience fresh by giving them unique attack patterns. So you have enemies that come in like wave patterns. Some of them throw projectiles at you. Some of them pick up the environment and use that to attack you. Some of them charge you. Some of them swing melee weapons. And the bosses too. Just as much variety in the bosses. There's anything from a towering golem, that stone golem that needs to be broken up piece by piece, to a giant flying bat that you battle on top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And there's just so much variety. And that was one thing that struck me in this game is that it kept the experiences fresh. I mean, the last level I played, unfortunately, because of the hurricane and everything, I didn't have a chance to play the entire game through. You know, I had to do some preparation this week. But the last level I played, there was actually an abandoned war factory, and the enemies were like skeletons with helmets on. Like they looked like they were World War One factory um, workers who died and then came back to life as skeletons. Did you guys find that the same thing with the enemies? Were you like really impressed, like I was, with the enemies that you had in the game? Oh,
Well, I was really impressed with the enemies in terms of the design, because I really liked how they just blended basically with wherever they were. Like it wasn't as popping out as, for example, you know how games have in the game called King of Dragons in the Super Nintendo is actually an arcade game also. When you have enemies that pop out from the environment, it's almost as if like they're really meant to be in that area only, and you can if and they change their colors depending on whether they're going to be repeated in a higher stage and they're more difficult. But as for this game, it's almost as if like they have a unique set of enemies per area, Like for example, the jumping people from the part where you have water, and they jump out under the water, then they shoot out those acids. That was really good. I mean, I was surprised because they were really meant to surprise you, and then they shoot and then they just jump away. And what the problem with the enemies though is that they die easily. I mean, I don't know. I know that's not supposed to be something to actually be complaining about, but um, I just didn't feel that they were giving you a challenge. I mean, they were giving you different kinds of enemies. I mean, except for the mini bosses and the bosses, the enemies sort of just you hit them once with Eric and they're dead. I mean,
The
other than the enemies that are wrongly placed and the stairs or whatever, there isn't really a challenge when it comes to like the regular enemies that just appear, but there are some instances where how the enemy works really affects you. Like for example, there's this area where in the second stage, the one with the water,
Yeah.
you're just walking forward, and then you're pushing out ledges, and then you start to step on them. There's this one part where you're just walking, and then this guy who's on the other side, you can't hit him with your spear because he's too far. Then all of a sudden he's like he just runs into you, he hits you, and then you fall into the water. And I was just like, wow, that's
bad.
pretty good. I was surprised because like I killed like three of these guys before I met this other guy, and he's the same enemy. I know that I can kill him in one shot, but he just jumped into me and I fell. And I thought it was pretty good. I mean, I was like, yeah, that's how you make enemies. I mean, it's really supposed to make you be careful of just attacking them. It's not just go straight forward and just keep swinging your shit and just hit them. It's like you have to be careful. I mean, that's pretty good. I mean, I liked it.
I agree with you totally. What do you think, Jason?
I also thought they were quite easy for the most part. Most of them just took a single hit, but they did. Each level did have their unique set of enemies, and they did fit in with the level very well, and they complemented the level design. That's what made the challenge kind of more the way the level designed and enemies would pop up in inconvenient locations. And any of the ones besides the bosses and mini bosses that would cause any trouble, most of the ones that take 2 or 3 hits to kill, seems like those maybe are like an exit of a level. If you could get past them, just walk through the door, you don't even have to fight them at all. So you can kind of avoid a lot of the harder enemies if you didn't want to fight them.
Absolutely. And did you face the I really don't know actually I should have researched this. I don't know the name of them, but like the flying bird things in the leaning power tower pieces stage. Did you remember those things?
Yeah, I do.
Ah, those things were just so annoying because they were like in your reach, but every time you jumped to attack them, they'd like scoot backwards just like I don't know 5 feet, and you'd miss by just like a couple inches. I was just getting so frustrated because okay. I was getting so frustrated because here we are trying to get like a perfect run through the stage, and they just dive bomb me. They're basically trolling me. There's no other way to put it. What do you think, Jacob? I know we're actually talking in the conference area, but what do you think about the overall enemies in the game? We'll try to make this kind of short because I know
Yeah,
Paolo's got to
the
get off. But
time constraints. No, the enemies were generally easy to kill, except for the issue came in that there was just so many of them, and they just infinitely spawned, and I'm
I hate all of the spawning. they
yeah, I
don't
know,
they don't
just
run out.
forever. I'm like, I'm just trying to move forward. Now you're coming from behind me too, and I have to turn around and kill that. And
yeah,
That
really,
sounded so wrong.
coming from behind.
yeah, it's a challenge. But no, and part of it again is just looking at their movement patterns and some of the flying enemies would just weave in. And it's like, all right, where is it gonna land? Where is it gonna land? And I found with the whip especially, it was really inconsistent right in front of you. And so it's like, all right, this should kill it, but it's just not going to do the job. And
Right.
overall, not really a problem. Just so many, but it was just so many enemies.
Yeah, and they do respawn. That's the thing is, I guess if you're playing most of the games like this type, you will have respawning enemies. The instant you walk off screen, you come back and they're there staring at you at the face again. So that is kind of a complaint that we have, but I think that's more of a modern day complaint because we've played so many games where they've just omitted that. And when we really go back, we find that all these games have that kind of embedded in it as a kind of a obvious thing for all these games. But overall, I think the enemies were just there's a great assortment of them, and even though they were kind of easy to kill and kind of predictable at times, it still kept the game fresh. What do you guys think about the music though? Because I personally think this has
Music is awesome.
a great soundtrack. These tunes are memorable, and I know that last time when we were reviewing the last game, we kind of disagreed on soundtrack. I personally thought the last game soundtrack was kind of plain, but here is a game that I think we all can agree that the tunes are memorable, and there are some Castlevania staples thrown in, and they're actually remixed for the Genesis. What do you guys think about the soundtrack of the game?
Soundtrack is
Just
it's great. It's really amazing.
yeah, just
I love it.
just good.
Jason, do you think you would download? I don't know if I'm the only one who does this, but download the actual soundtrack of the game and
I
listen
do.
to
I
it.
downloaded actually all the game. I mean, the soundtracks I really like, and I actually look for covers on YouTube because those are really
Yeah.
good.
There was even one I've heard where they took the Sonic 3 instrument sounds and run the MIDI from Castlevania game through it, which
Oh
is
yeah,
pretty cool.
Jason,
That's pretty
you
cool.
agree, Jason?
I thought the sounds were pretty good. I don't know if they necessarily fit the levels the way I think they should,
Right.
but they sounded very Konami-like, and they wouldn't necessarily feel out of place in other Konami games like Life Force or Gradius or some other type of game of a totally different style.
You hit it on the head. Konami has a special style, I think, and even especially on the NES, like playing Contra and things like that. And this doesn't disappoint at all in terms of a Konami game. So, I mean, we've reviewed now. I think all the core components of the game. But before we get into the rating, I really got to ask you guys. You're at Walmart. Let's go back to this zombie invasion. You're at Walmart. What do you pick up as a weapon to defend yourself from these ravenous zombies? I'll start with Pow. What are you going to choose?
Oh man, you know what? I mean, my friends and I talk about this a lot. Like, oh, if we are gonna be in a zombie invasion, like, with who are the people that we are gonna be in have our team with? And I was always the guy who's gonna be the medic because I'm the only one who's gonna be in medicine. So I never really thought that I was the guy who's gonna be have a gun. I was, I'm just gonna be like, oh, you know what? You have wounds. I'm gonna heal you while you shoot people. It's always gonna be that way. So, now that you're asking me like what I should use against the zombies, I always thought that maybe I should sacrifice a friend, or maybe an enemy. Like maybe, oh look, you're fat. I should leave you here, and
That's awful,
I
dude.
only have to outrun you.
Oh my
yeah,
God. So what he's saying is
I'm
he's
thinking,
gonna stab you in the leg with a syringe, and then you're gonna be zombie
yeah,
bait, and he's gonna run off.
like this will make you better, but oops,
Oh my God,
morphine.
what a terrible start! I thought that we'd be like, all right, we're gonna stick to this to the end. We're all gonna we die together, or we don't live
No,
at
I mean
all.
obviously I'm not gonna do it to. I mean if it was just the four of us, I don't think I'm gonna do it. I mean
Alright,
obviously, I mean we're never gonna be alone anyway. So
right.
but if for example I see someone like hey you should come with us, now you become bait.
Yeah. Okay. So okay, your weapon is finding a straggler and throwing them at the zombies.
Yes.
Okay, Jason. Let's see. Do you have a weapon in mind and use against the zombies?
Well, you said we could pick up a combination of
Yeah,
items,
combination of
so
items.
I'd grab some kind of stick, whether it's a bat or a broom handle or whatever, a bunch of duct tape and some sharp objects, whether that's nails or knives or whatever I could find.
I like that. You're working the character of Eric Lacard into the game into the scenario now by constructing your own spear. I had thought
Yeah,
about that too.
Jason's weapon is pretty sick.
Yeah,
I mean that's something you could just kill someone with
he
really. I
could
mean,
if he takes a bat too. I mean, you got the blunt object. You could just smash the zombies apart, and then you could just create those surgical incisions and cut them apart. That's actually a good idea. What do you got, Jacob? What do you got for us?
I was gonna go get a shovel.
A shovel? Just beat them over the head?
No, not even that. It's got reach. It's thin metal. It'll cut too. It's pointy. It's strong. You blunt end. It's long and
I totally imagined something else when you said shovel. I thought you were just gonna. I thought you were gonna like dig holes and like
Oh
wait
no,
for
it's
them to
also
come.
like that's another thing. It's also utile. Like, oh, the store is cool. Yeah, we also for some reason need to dig a hole. Yeah,
There you go.
gardening. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll
And they're
use.
gonna fall over.
Yeah, you can do pretty much anything, but yeah, I'm reminded of the military grade shovels that were used to like.
Yeah, yeah, entrenching tools.
Yeah, and not only that,
What about you, Ryan?
well, I'll tell you what I'm gonna pick, but it may surprise you. Um, I would first take a shopping cart and load it up with weights, like from the sporting goods section, and I would use the shopping cart as my weapon. Because I thought about this, and you got to figure that these zombies, I mean, if they're half dead or if they're dead and reanimated, they've got a serious case of muscular atrophy. So, I mean, a shopping cart to the knees is just going to ruin their day.
You know what? The big question here is: are we fighting fast zombies or slow zombies?
No, let's just say that the fast zombies are a product of idea-starved culture, and that we're just going to pick the classic zombies. the,
Okay, yeah, then just
I
the slow zombies.
yeah,
I
If we're
want to
talking
change
about
my
slow zombies,
weapon to
then I'm
time.
changing my idea.
yeah.
I can't use fat guys for slow zombies. I can't outrun them.
No. I'd like to change my weapon to time. I'm just gonna wait till they finish decomposing.
Good idea. Good idea.
That's pretty good.
Well, that's awesome. This is delivered, I must say. So we have still not exactly sure what Paulo would choose if he wants to pick up his.
I'll use like banana peels or
Oh,
something.
got the Diddy Kong approach, and Jason's got the
Yeah.
spear.
No, that's the Mario Kart approach.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Mario Kart. Uh, except you have to be riding on a go kart, and at that point you could just run into them and tear them apart anyway. And that would be fun though, to watch you riding around like a Mario Kart style go kart and just blam, rolling the zombies over. And so Jason has his spear, and Jacob's got time on his side. And I've got my shopping cart, which obviously I can always also use as a transportation. So it's not perfect. We don't have guns and we don't have rocket launchers like in Resident Evil, and we don't have a big sword like Dante from Devil May Cry.
Oh, that's.
You know what?
I'm seeing so many innuendos in this thing. I don't
Oh,
know what's wrong with it.
well, we've got our weapons. That's awesome. Okay, now let's talk about Castlevania. Just give it a final rating because we have to do this at the end of every episode of every podcast. We've got to give it kind of a maybe a 1 out of 10 rating. What do you think, Paulo, of Castlevania? One of your first Genesis games now that you've played. What 1 out of 10? What is your score? Your final score?
Well, I can't really give it a fair rating because I haven't really played any other games. But in comparison to all the other SNES games, I would have to say I'll give it like a 7 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10 because it's really good. I actually enjoyed it. I really like the graphics. I mean, I was a little bit confused if I was gonna hate it because I mean I wasn't really a big fan of Castlevania, but when I started playing it, I was just like, wow, this looks great, and it was exciting. It wasn't. I mean, even if the game was a little bit easy, I mean some parts are difficult, obviously, but the game was relatively easy in comparison to all the other Castlevania games, but it was still exciting. I mean, it was great. I would finish the game if I still had time.
I agree. What do you think, Jason?
I'd also give it a 7 out of 10. I thought, graphically, it is a good looking game. Just control wise, it created some frustration in there that if the controls were a little better, I'd probably rate it a little higher.
All right. And Jacob, what do you got?
I was thinking about 7.5 again. It flowed well. The game didn't lag or anything. It was well designed. It looked beautiful. The character of it was great. It was all there except for again there was just enough little frustrations about it all that it just uh drove it down a little bit.
Okay. My score for this, I'm debating on giving it a 9 out of 10, and I'll tell you why. Because it's a Castlevania game, and I just know what to expect with these games. If I criticize it too heavily on the parts that I don't like, I feel like I'd be criticizing the whole series. But since we kind of have to look at this from a game to game approach, I'll give it an 8 out of 10, or maybe an 8 out of 5 out of 10, or 8.5 out of 10, because overall the storyline isn't perfectly presented in the narrative. It's kind of just lingering about, and it's not until the end of the game that you really get to wrap things up. But the graphics are excellent. The sound is just beautiful compositions after beautiful composition, and for all the rigidness of the game's controls, we know that to be classic Castlevania, so we kind of know what we're getting into. And most importantly, the replay value is there because you have two characters to pick. So I'll pick it. I'll give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think that would be my score. And I'm very happy that this game scored pretty well because I was afraid. I was afraid what to expect with how badly Donald crashed. Poor Donald. But
Well, I think it's just that we had really high expectations of Donald. I mean, I think when we got there, we were just like, oh, I think this is gonna be a good game, but it, I mean, Donald was like a girl. He was like, hey, I'm pretty, but I don't have attitude. You get.
it's
I mean,
true.
I'm pretty sure like I'm pretty sure it was fine. I mean, if you were just playing it for fun, but if you wanted to be like nitpicky about things.
Yeah.
You mean if it was gonna be like, oh, we only have one release and this is gonna be it? It's not a really good game. But it was a pretty fun game. But Castlevania though is pretty good.
Fantastic.
I'm really
Yeah,
yeah.
very good game. And I was worried too because I mean I was worried that we come too hard on some of the downfalls of the game, but I think we really gave it a fair perspective. And next time we meet, I believe what we'll be discussing is Double Dragon 2. Is that correct?
Yes.
Double
Yes.
Dragon 2. We'll be-
You guys are gonna love it. But I suggest though that you find someone you can play with, because the 2 player version you get the same enemies when you're playing two players, so you really should find someone to play with. But if you can't, you can just it's fun. It's still fun. It's a really good game.
Excellent.
I'm marketing it to you guys.
No need to market it. We know it's an awesome game. It's Double Dragon. It carries that.
I think Jason played it, right? Jason.
Yeah, I have played it.
Yeah.
We know it's going to be fun. But this has been a fun time here at the X Dudes convention for the conference, and I
The
really
X-Dudes.
wish that we would be able to unite our powers and get people from all over the globe, Brazil
Yeah,
and
we're
United
mad.
Kingdom.
We're trying.
We are trying, and hopefully we'll figure out the time schedule thing eventually. But this has been a fun Halloween episode. It's fun doing this with you guys, and
Yeah, it was really fun, guys.
Yeah.
we will come up with a time when we meet and discuss the brilliant game that is Double Dragon 2. All right?
Okay.
Excellent.
Cheers, guys.
Take it
All right.
easy, guys.
Cool. See ya.